Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to Reserved Investments, and thank you for joining me. In today's video, we are going to be looking at 3 more collecting categories that are either dead or dying. So if you are attempting to invest long-term in any of these collecting categories that we are going to be talking about in today's video, you may wish to reconsider. Now, every time I do a video like this, I usually get a lot of negative commentary from the people that truly love these particular items that we're going to be talking about today. If that is you, you continue to do you. This video is geared towards the people that may want to attempt to invest long-term in these particular items. This is a hardcore collectibles finance channel. That's what you're watching when you turn on Reserved Investments on YouTube. As a result, if you just have a passion towards these items, if you're somebody you don't care about the financial investment over the next 5, 10, 15, 20 years, you continue to do you. For those of you out there, though, that are thinking of investing in some of these markets, I'm going to explain to you why investing in a lot of the collecting categories that we're going to be talking about today over the long term is a bad idea, with few exceptions. Now that I've said all that, we can dive right in to these collecting categories. First on our list is the market for antique and or vintage pedal cars. Now, if you don't know what a pedal car is, you need to spend some time watching a couple episodes of either Pawn Stars or American Pickers or even Antiques Roadshow. Pedal cars came into vogue in the late 1800s. They are almost as old as the gas engine automobile itself. And for the record, Henry Ford did not invent the very first car. The actual patent for a gas engine automobile was filed in 1886 by Carl Benz. And you may know that name if you are familiar with Mercedes-Benz. It is the same individual. All is what Henry Ford did was he basically brought mass production to the masses so that the average family could eventually afford an automobile. And that's what pretty much put the whole thing into revolution. And that's why today, pretty much everybody owns a gas engine automobile. So it's very interesting when we look at some of these markets, how they evolve. When we look at pedal cars are obviously directly linked to the popularity and the invention of the gas engine automobile. Now, pedal cars came into their own in the 1920s and 30s. In fact, if you were growing up in the 1920s and 30s and your parents got you a pedal car for Christmas or they just bought you one out of the blue, your family was very wealthy because at this particular point in time, pedal cars were not yet mass produced. Most ordinary folk, most middle income folk could not afford a pedal car back in the 1920s and 30s. That would occur in the 1950s and 60s after the Second World War when mass production was a common thing. A lot of individuals then started buying their kids pedal cars in the 1950s and 60s, and that's why baby boomers tend to flock to these particular items as collectibles. As a matter of fact, if we get in my DeLorean time machine and we go back to the 1980s, 1990s, early 2000s, you'll see pedal cars were selling for significant premiums at auctions back then because the baby boomers that grew up in the 1950s and 60s, now they were in their prime, they were in their peak earning years, and they were starting to buy back pieces of their childhood. Over the last 10 years, however, 95% of the antique and vintage pedal car market has pretty much been in the doldrums. There are several exceptions. If you really study this market, you're going to come across pedal cars that sell for tens of thousands of dollars. In a few small instances, you will find pedal cars that have sold for more than 6 figures at auction. These are the exception. They're not the rule. Now, if you're somebody that goes to a lot of flea markets, if you're somebody that goes to antique marts, and you come across these items and they're selling at significantly depressed under market values, meaning you can buy these items and you can flip them on the secondary market, by all means, buy the item and flip it on the secondary market and take your profit. But if you are somebody that wants to invest in these items over the long term, meaning you want to go to the market, you have to pay full retail price for this item, you're going to put it in your house, you're going to keep it there for 5, 10, 15, 20 years and expect to make a profit, that's more than likely not going to happen in a market like this. There are no catalysts on the horizon that is going to cause another boom in antique and vintage pedal cars. So just use this as a cautionary tale where if you're attempting to invest in this market, your investment dollars would be better utilized elsewhere. Next collecting category that we're going to be talking about in today's video is the market for vintage Hess toy trucks. Now, if you don't know the history of Hess toy trucks became a thing back in the mid-1960s. The very first vintage Hess toy truck was produced in 1964, and it sold at retail back then for roughly $1.40, meaning $1.40. Today, if you have that original vintage Hess truck number 1 that came out in 1964, it is worth anywhere from $2,000 to $3,000 on the open market. Other vintage toy Hess trucks from the 1960s and 70s do have some collector value on the secondary market. If you bought those items, if you kept them in pristine condition, you did very well. The problem is, if you look at an auction history of those particular items, they are now starting to fall in value because, again, these particular collectibles were made popular by not only baby boomers, but also older Gen Xers. For the record, I'm a Gen Xer. I was born in 1976. There would be Gen Xers in their 50s that pretty much coveted these particular items and remember the very first ones. The Hess toy trucks that I remember were from the 1980s. The 1980 versions of these items are not worth as much as the toy trucks from the 1960s and 70s, obviously. If you're attempting to invest in these particular items over the long term, make no mistake, there are better uses for your investment dollars. You can go after some of the 1980s toy lines like Star Wars or G.I. Joe or Transformers or Thundercats or Masters of the Universe, and why those markets have significant risks and headwinds as well. Watch my other videos on vintage toys. You would be better off putting your money there over the long term, or at least over the next 5, 10 years, than trying to invest in vintage Hess trucks that pretty much aren't even culturally relevant anymore in the year 2024, okay? The last and final collecting category we have to talk about in this video is the market for vintage metal lunchboxes. Now, I know this is a controversial choice for some of you. I know some of you guys really love these particular items. I myself, growing up in the 1980s, I remember I had a Return of the Jedi metal lunchbox. I remember I had a G.I. Joe metal lunchbox. I remember I had a Masters of the Universe lunchbox back in the 80s. Well, these particular items came into fruition back in the 1950s. Believe it or not, the first metal lunchbox that graced a licensed pop culture character was actually Superman back in the 1950s. And if you own that 1950s Superman lunchbox and it's in excellent condition, near mint condition at present time, that particular item sells on the secondary market for anywhere from $8,000 to $12,000. You may even get a little bit more for it depending on condition. Make no mistake, that is the exception, not the rule. If you look at the market for a lot of these metal lunchboxes that came out in the 1960s, 70s, 80s, you will see, with few instances, that most of them are trending down in value. Now, this is where my critics are going to attack me, because it is true. If you look up the value of a vintage metal Star Wars lunchbox, or a Masters of the Universe lunchbox, or a Transformers lunchbox, or a G.I. Joe lunchbox, those particular items still have collecting appeal on the secondary market, simply because a Star Wars collector, a G.I. Joe collector, a Masters of the Universe collector that has all the action figures is going to want to accent or highlight that collection with a vintage lunchbox from that era as well, based on that popular toy line. Those are the exceptions, not the rule. And over the coming years, you will see that those particular items are starting to decline on the secondary market. Investing in vintage metal lunchboxes is not wise, especially given the fact that a lot of younger generations do not have the same emotional attachment to these items. And let's not even get into talking about some of the more obscure licensed properties that grace the covers are some of these lunchboxes, whether we're talking the A-Team, whether we're talking Knight Rider, whether we're talking lesser known licensed properties that no longer have relevance in the year 2023 heading into 2024. Therefore, if you are attempting to invest in any of these markets, or maybe you have a collection of this stuff somewhere, it may be best to start going through it and letting some of it go. I can tell you this, talking about all three of these collecting categories in general that I just covered: pedal cars, Hez trucks, and metal lunchboxes. Auction companies are not too keen on taking these items for consignment anymore. That should tell you something. So if you log on to Morphe's auctions, if you log on to Heritage, if you log on to Hakes, you're going to see a lot less of these items popping up. It's not because people aren't willing to sell them. It's because there's no demand there on the buying side. Auction companies go towards the money-making items at any given time: coins, currency, comic books, collectible card games, video games, vintage toys. They're not geared towards accepting items from the past like Pez dispensers or vintage magazines or Hess trucks or metal lunchboxes. Learn from this, guys. You can profit from these markets if you understand how to analyze them. That's what I bring to this channel. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. Thank you for watching.